All right. Let me see. We on 67.
Episode 67.
Yeah, if I'm not
Welcome to
mistaken.
the No Name Podcast.
Yeah.
Episode 67, the last book of John. Thank you for being with us through the journey. Hopefully, you guys have been keeping up with it. We're on John chapter 21, the breakfast, as it's sometimes called.
That's what it's called. Yeah.
Again, hit the like and subscribe button. Again, hopefully you've been keeping up with the Bible study. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a Bible study that we have. You guys are brought into it as well and can participate and be part of it. It's learnings for us just as much for you guys. So it's not really
Definitely
teaching. It's also us learning. So again, appreciate some of the comments that have been going out there, the sharing. I saw a comment out there, and I didn't really know the user's name, but talking about relating with Mary Magdalene from our last recording, and I thought that was good. Yes, I think we had touched on how Mary Magdalene was kind of still there following around because of the healing that God had given her. And that's kind of a lot of us is when we truly are grateful for what God did for us, we go and we seek Him more.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to seek the miracle worker, not the miracle. I think that's sometimes where we get lost is when we're seeking the miracle instead of seeking the miracle worker. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening to John. We're going to wrap it up here in John chapter 21. Maybe we'll put a summary together at the end of this or on a separate episode, but then we'll be looking to move on to a new book. So John chapter 21, I don't know, does someone have somewhere where they want to start? I think there's a lot here in this.
Well, I think this is the third time he shows himself to them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's
And in verse 3, Peter decides that he wants to go fishing. Why? He was a fisherman, that's but the reasoning I really don't know why he went. Was he discouraged or did he go back to what he did because Christ had died? But by this time he had already seen Christ twice, because I think it said all the disciples have seen him 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
This was the 3rd time. And then the other disciples, said that they would go fishing with him.
Yeah.
And they all got in the boat. And you're talking about experienced fishermen, most of them, because it doesn't say how many of them went.
Right.
But most of them were experienced fishermen, and they caught nothing. Nothing. They had been fishing all night. And they didn't catch nothing. It's like, we've gone fishing through the channels, and you never caught nothing, and I did.
That was a real stretch to pull that story.
But they had the experience, and then it says in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Jesus stood on the shore. Okay, he stood on the shore. I thought he was on the water.
No.
He stood at the shore.
I think part of this is you have the disciples haven't been sent out yet. Like they haven't gotten the Great Commission. They haven't gotten any of that. They're still there figuring it out. I still think they're in a mix of emotions of what's going on. They've, to your point, seen Jesus 3 times now. But
do you think that Peter, when he went, do you think that he just wanted to like Pop Dukes was saying, like, do you think he was just trying to get back to like his normal life? Because that's, when I think about that, that's how he actually first met Jesus.
Yeah.
well,
You know what I mean? When he was fishing.
I think it calls back to his first meeting, but I think it's also, I think when we're not sure what we're supposed to do or whatever, we go back to our natural.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't know what he was supposed to do yet. Like, I don't think any of them knew. Like, Jesus leaves. Like, he tells them he's leaving. He tells them a lot of things, but he leaves through his death, and he comes back, shows himself a couple of times to them. And again, maybe there's because John makes it clear there's a lot of things that happened that weren't written. But there's nothing clear here that he's given them the final directions or anything. Now, he's told them throughout the time of their discipleship, but again, this is the first time they're going to be leading ministry on their own. Like, there's no Jesus there. He sent them out 2 by 2 at one point. But again, when he sent them out, he told them, you have this authority for a short time period. And they haven't done it since. Like, they don't really have this. So I think they're trying to figure out, like, what's their next step. And honestly, the way I look at it is you see a bunch of disciples who are worried. When you're worried, you go back and do whatever.
What you know.
Yeah.
That's your peace.
I think that happens too. I mean, this happens a lot now in our Christian life and in our ministry churches and all that. Like their dream was shattered, you know, because Jesus came. They thought he was the king of, you know, he was going to be the king of the earth, of the Jews, right? And you know, for 3.5 years they followed him and all that. And it's like a lot of us. Anytime we hear something negative that we don't like, even though it's a positive thing, we tend to shut it down. We don't want to hear, you know. It's like, have you ever seen the people in the church? We make the announcements and all that, and then afterwards, when the event happens or whatever we're having, they say, I didn't know about it. What do you mean you didn't know? We've been announcing it. But they didn't listen. And I think when it would come to Jesus dying, because he would tell them throughout the time.
Yeah, he was telling them.
It was necessary for him to die. You know, they didn't really want to, I guess, believe it. You know, they wanted to believe that he was going to be here with them forever. And then once he died, I think that shattered all their hopes. I don't know if you can call them dreams, but the vision that Christ was giving them. See, so it's natural for them to go back to what they were comfortable with. Like Peter was comfortable being a fisherman. You know, that was his lifestyle. So he said, if I'm going fishing. He didn't invite nobody. He said, I'm going to go fishing. And then the rest, you know, they said, you know what? Because Peter was a born leader, you know. So guess what? All the other ones followed him. So they all got in the boat with him, you know. And then, you know, on the chapter 4, the last part says, yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus, you know. I mean, they had already seen him twice after the resurrection. You know, this is the third time. But yet they still could not recognize it was Jesus. It was the Lord and Savior, you know. And then it says, then Jesus told them, children, have you any food? They answered him, no. And then they said, and he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast now, and they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. It's weird how they obeyed what he told them. One, they did not know yet that was Jesus, and yet they threw the net. And these were, you know, some of them were experienced fishermen, you know, and they,
Well, I don't think it's that strange, honestly, because you got to remember it's a recallment to the first time they get called. The first time when he meets them and he tells them the same thing, they make excuses and say, we've been fishing all night. Why are we going to toss our nets out?
Okay.
So he's told them this before.
Right.
Like when he first meets them as disciples, when he's calling them to be disciples, he tells them to cast their nets out, and they're like, we've been fishing all night, this and that, and he tells them again, and then they do it. This time they don't do it because even though they may not recognize him, they're coming. It's almost like, again, in the story, it's coming full circle. I think it's something that we've talked about throughout the theme of John, and even towards the end of it, is that you're seeing a break from what their thought process of who Christ was,
right, and
being transformed into what he truly is, and then what he wants them to do. And so I think even though he's seen them twice, we can talk to God hundreds of times.
Yeah.
We can still get discouraged and down because there's one thing for God to forgive us, but there's the next thing for us to forgive ourselves. And Peter hadn't forgiven himself because if you jump down, they title it as the restoring of Peter.
Yeah.
And that's not what the author titles it. That's what we title it later on as
Yeah.
the subject. But what you're seeing here is Peter still beating up on himself. He's
Because
still
he
not
denied
sure
Christ.
he can be used for Christ.
Yeah.
Worthy to be
Yeah.
Christ.
I mean,
he missed the whole thing.
That's the story of most of our lives.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
You know,
Yeah.
That's
we
why
can't sometimes.
that's what.
Yeah,
that's
we
exactly
can't
what I'm
forgive
saying.
ourselves.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
You know,
Yeah.
so
That's what I think that's what's so appealing about the story of Peter when you actually look at it is that this is not a perfect man. He's not someone who had it all together or even did it right. And that's what I think is interesting is like he goes fishing, the disciples are with him, and when you see it, you see I think you start seeing the transformation of Peter and the disciples. Because here's where you guys start comparing it, right? To your point, he tells them to cast out the net and they do it. If you go back and read in the other gospels, when he meets them, they're kind of like, no,
we ain't doing that. Yeah, I remember.
We've been working
Right.
all night. But this time they just do it. Even though they don't recognize who he is on shore, there's something about him.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they do that, I think John says it's the Lord. And Peter immediately
He just jumped in the water and started
switched.
swimming over there. Yeah.
Peter, before, when Jesus is walking on water and he tells them, it's me, and he says, if it's truly you, then let me walk out on the water. Like if Peter had doubt, he would have shouted to the shore, Lord, if it's you, prove something, do something. Peter's no longer asking for proof. He's
Yeah.
just jumping in and swimming.
in the water.
So you're starting to see the minor transformation of who Peter is going to become going into the New Testaments, the Acts and the letters, because now he's a man who's going to have to lead the faith through many different things, and you see him starting to understand his faith, and I think that's what you start seeing through this is because what's interesting about it is they catch all this fish, and Jesus asks them if they're hungry. He asks them if they're hungry, and they catch all this fish. But if you read, when they get there, he's already cooking bread and fish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they didn't need to catch anything to
Yeah.
eat because he gets there and they're
But I
already,
think he wanted to prove to them that he did a miracle for them.
no,
because,
I totally agree.
They threw that net and there was so much fish they couldn't even put it in.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I
that's
think
cool.
I think it calls back to
It-
it goes back to the belief, right? The first time they meet Jesus, they don't truly believe they don't know, they've heard of him.
Yeah.
They don't know who he is, so they push back. This time they just throw the nets over and there's this miracle happening. That's what I mean. Like you're starting to see the transformation of them. Even though they're not fully there yet, they're transforming into trusting him instead of questioning him.
Because faith has to grow. It cannot be just your beginning faith. As time goes by as Christians and all that, faith has to grow. And just like them, God does little miracles or big miracles to show us that He's still with us. He's still the Lord.
Yeah.
Even though we're just supposed to believe in faith, but He'll show us that, you know what? And
Now here's the interesting part I think of this is I don't know. This is my opinion as I was rereading it. I don't know. Jesus could transform his image. And for whatever reason, he was different than what they were normal seeing. Like, I don't know if it's because he was more glorified or what, but because it wasn't just that they were in the distance. And to your point, they've seen him twice. So you could use the excuse that when they were in the boat, they couldn't see who he was, so they didn't know who he was. But then you see when they come to eat, in verse 12, it says, Jesus said to them, come and eat breakfast. Yet none of the disciples dare ask him, who are you, knowing that it's the Lord. Like, it's interesting that John specifically calls this out because, again, there's a transformation of them. They're no longer having to ask who he is or what, or there's just a belief and knowing. There's something that they know now that it's him, it's their master, it's the person that they've had a relationship with. and there's no longer, but yet there could have been a reason why they asked, because John wouldn't have thrown it in there of who are you if there wasn't. Like, that's the crazy part of Christ. He can come in any form he wants, and so we have no idea what form he's actually here in, like, as he's presenting himself to them. But whatever form it was going to cause them to doubt. They were going to trust in him.
Yeah.
Like I said, they dare not to ask. They already knew who he was, And it's sad that, sometimes we can come to church and get involved and all that and still not know who Jesus is, Because sometimes we think that our relationship is doing things, and just coming to church. But a relationship, any relationship, you have to get to know the person, and know who he is. And they knew exactly who he was. Probably all those teachings for 3.5 years started coming to them again, bringing them up in their minds and all that, and it's.
But to your point, I think part of knowing who he was asking the question, "Who are you?" But they no longer
they didn't have to ask.
Like
Right.
there's, to me, when I see this echoes, and I can't remember if it's in the boat or somewhere, but there's a part where they say, "Well, who are you?" And he says, "Well, who do they say I am?"
Right.
And they say, "Well, some say you're a prophet. Some say you're the reincarnation of Elijah. Some say you're this, and some say that you're the Messiah." And he says, and I don't remember what his full response is, but again, and I think even I don't know if it's at that point, because there's a point where he even asked Peter, saying, who do you think I am?"
Yeah.
And Peter says, "You're the Messiah." And he says, "What you've spoken is of the Spirit." Again, I just think, like, this is kind of the growth that happens, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you have to go and not ask man, but go and ask God, like, who are you? And get to know him, because through our preachings and even through our teachings, you're gonna hear who Christ is to us. Yeah. And even at times, like, we may have a certain view or certain things, but you have to have that personal relationship with him, and you have to seek him and get to know him. And the only way you do that is by going there and spending time with him. Because that's what I find, like, Jesus didn't need to eat, yet he's here eating with his disciples. Like, he has a glorified body. Like, I don't know, I've heard some people use this as, well, maybe we'll still eat and drink when we're in heaven. Now, it doesn't mean that you need it for nourishment or you need it so that you'll survive, but you actually get to eat it for enjoyment.
Well,
because I mean, the things that would happen in this world if we actually didn't need to eat to survive, there'd be probably less wars, less you go through.
Oh, definitely.
But again, I don't know if that's true or not. But again, they're sitting there, and Jesus is having fish and bread with them.
And what I find interesting, he served them. You see, he said, "Come and eat." And 13, it says, Jesus then came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. See, still he was being a servant to to his disciples. Which tells us that we're always going to be servants no matter what. We were supposed to serve the Lord and all that, and
Well, and I think it's going to go into the next piece here. And I was actually thinking about it the other day, like, when you're so worried about life and everything that's going on, because life's always going to bring problems and things like that. When you're worried about all those things, you're not. If they overcome you, you're not focused on Christ. You're not focused on who he is. And that's what you see in the life of Peter. Like, you see Peter when he's in the boat, like, he's all the disciples. They're focused on the worry of, are they going to survive this boat? Mm-hmm. Are they going to survive all the things that are going on? You see it even after the death of Christ. They all scattered and they're worried. Here, they're still worried. That's why I don't think they've moved on, because they haven't been commanded. They don't know what to do. They haven't been fully restored yet.
Yeah.
They're still worried about how they failed Christ. They're worried about how are they going to survive this. They're being hunted down by the Pharisees, and the worry.
Yeah.
Because even in Acts, like the biggest one that hunts them down is not Rome. Rome's not chasing
No, it's the
them yet.
Jew. It's their own
It's
people.
the Jewish.
The Jews.
It's the Jewish council.
Yeah.
And
Their own people.
so
Yeah.
you have Peter here, and I think you have all the disciples, and they're worried. And I think that's one of the things that, again, that's why I like the story of Peter, because you have to look through the whole thing and see the transformation of him. And you see a guy who's in a boat, and for whatever reason, the moment that Christ tells him it's me, and he calls him out to walk on there, he stops worrying about everything else. Like, he stops worrying about the storm he was worried about. He stops worrying about everything, and he's just focused on Christ. Then the moment a wave comes or whatever, it takes his focus off of the moment, and he puts it back on his worries. And you see the same thing here with Peter. Again,
Yeah.
his worries on how he felt Christ, how can he lead. Like, Christ has already told him, you're one of the cornerstones I'm going to build on, and all these things. And in his mind, I can only imagine that it's, how can I do that when I failed you, when I done this and that. And so that's why I think Jesus has this breakfast, because the next piece, he starts talking to Peter, and he says, Peter, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said, feed my lambs. And he tells him 3 times.
Yeah.
And he gives him a similar response, but when you look at the translation, it's a little different. He tells him again, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, tend my sheep. And he said to him a 3rd time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, Jesus is here telling them 3 times, do you love me? And he's like, if you love me and you know that I love you, then let go of these worries and focus on others.
You know, it just made me think. It just made me right now. I just, I think that's why his resurrection was so important. You know, for him to resurrect, and to show all of us that, you know what, that we can make it through with him. You know what I mean? Like, just thinking about that.
The lamb, is that the baby or the sheep part?
The lamb.
The lamb.
I mean, I think it's interchangeable, but I think the lambs are the younger ones.
The younger ones?
Yeah. Yeah, but no, I think just like you said, and then the whole correlation with him asking 3 times. I think that this whole chapter was really something really more special. I mean, again, like you say, we have to learn how to depend on Christ ultimately. But for Peter, I think because, like you said, he felt, maybe like you say, he felt a certain way. He Jesus told him, you're going to deny me. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to. Then he did. And so he felt, I think Peter probably felt, nobody knows what's going through his mind or what he's thinking or how he's feeling. But I just think that he really felt really, really grieved, really bad, because he was just like, man, like I said, I wasn't going to do that. And I did it,
Well,
and then,
yeah. You gotta remember,
you know what I mean?
You got to remember who this was written for.
So
here's sometimes the context that we lose because we think it's a regular story and it just walks through.
yeah,
John's right. I believe John's writing this later in his life towards his time in exile. So he's older now. The disciples have all died. The new generation of the church only knows Peter as this authority figure who's leading the church. They don't know the Peter who failed. They don't know the Peter who failed and had to be restored by Christ. And so and
I think that's what it was right there.
If you start seeing it, and you start, and not that Peter hid it. I think Peter was very open about what he went through and what he was and what happened to him. But that's the whole reason, the first generation of the church didn't need the New Testament because they had living proof. You had people who lived through it who were talking about it. They later write these letters down. John writes this because he's leaving this for the next generation that's not going to have the first-hand account.
Right.
And so they want him, somewhere where they can write it. And so you're seeing a transformation of someone because again, go back to what Jesus always told the disciples, the first in kingdom are the last. you want to be a master in the kingdom of heaven, you got to be a servant first. Like and they're seeing this of Peter. They're seeing a Peter who had to have Christ restore him because he failed that time.
And I think it's John was writing it too because of knowing what probably didn't know the future, but God probably showed him what the future was going to be. Because nowadays they make the pastors, the evangelists, the prophets, and they're even now apostles walking around, and and sometimes we make them invisible. Yeah. We make them like superheroes, like man, these are really men of God. When, I mean, even though we are, because we're considered men of God, but at the same time we're human. Yeah. We have to maintain a relationship with God.
Correct.
We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna fail sometimes. Yeah. And I believe the story of Peter is one of the most beautiful ones because it shows that no matter what, Peter still loved the Lord. Yep. Still followed. Because even after he denied him 3 times, you know what? The Bible says he was still following afar. Mm-hmm. He kept an eye on what was going on. And then when he appeared, they still were following him. But their faith was a little bit shattered now. And Jesus was restoring their faith.
Well, I think that's it. No, I think that's it.
Yeah, no.
And the first one where it says the lamb, that's why I wanted to know if it was the baby, I mean the smaller ones, because sometimes, we're gonna, like in our church, we're gonna get new people. They get saved, right? They're born again, they're babies in the Lord. That's where our attention should be a little bit more focused, working with them, getting them established, Then the other 2, it says that, what was it?
Tend my sheep.
10 my sheep.
10, yeah.
See, the next thing, once they start growing, they become sheep. We're just supposed to tend them. See, but a lot of them, they stay in that mentality that we're supposed to, like the lamb, feed them all the time. You got to come to a self. See, that's what I thank God that when I got out of the home, one of the first things my dad told me, look, I'm not going to feed you. Spiritually was talking.
Right.
Feed you as a baby all the time. You have to learn how to feed yourself. You have to learn how to mature in Christ. Don't wait for me to tell you when to pray. Don't wait for me to tell you when to read your Bible. Yep. And all those things. I'm going to teach you, but you need to grow so you can help me, And a lot of times people stay at a level that they want to be lambs, and they got to come to a point that you got to be sheep, and because we had, like now, God called us to tend it. Most of them that we have here, they're older Christians. Our job is to tend. And then the last one, he told them what? To feed my sheep. Yeah. And keep on feeding them. Mm-hmm. Like right now, through these podcasts, through our Sunday morning services. Yeah. And now we're having prayer every other week, and the men's fellowship. And they're going to start a women's fellowship. See, that's our job, to feed them. The thing is, you can't force feed to the people. They have to come in and be fed. See? The disciples and Peter, when Jesus told them they were hungry, they wanted something to eat. Peter got dressed and jumped in the water and swam to the shore. And the rest of the disciples were dragging the net, and they were taking a little bit more time because the net was so heavy. But yet they came to the Lord, So we can do all these things, but they have to come and they want to be fed, because, as a church, we've done what? Everything is possible to evangelize, which we're still doing outside, evangelize, trying to reach the people, for them to come to the Lord and be fed by Christ. But we can't force them. We've had hundreds, probably thousands come through our block parties, through our Thanksgiving dinner, through our Christmas drives and all that, and other things that we have done, Some just come and enjoy what we're having, and then they never come back.
Yeah.
And hopefully they went to other churches. You never know. But that seed was planted, But I believe God tells us too, He has to ask us, feed my lambs, feed them, And, babies are totally different, because they need a lot of attention, they got a lot of energy. And then once they grow, he tells them, tend my sheep. Take care of them, just tend them. If they try to stray, try to bring them back. And they say, feed my sheep. And then, what is it? Verse 18. Look what he tells them. There's most of, where is it?
Yeah. Truly, truly, I say to you.
When you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. In other words, you know what? You did whatever you wanted. You girded yourself. You were guiding yourself. Nobody else was guiding you. You went wherever you wanted to go. Wherever, He said, and then he said, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish
to go. Yeah.
But this
Is
that was speaking
is that
about his dad.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was speaking about his dad. I think in regards to tending and the feeding, I think that's a call for everyone. I think that's the interesting part of this last chapter. Is that combine. You can just look at it one way, or you can look at it through all the different multifacets of what's going on. Like Jesus is one having an intimate conversation with Peter here, with everyone around, but he's, I think,
giving them more encouragement, maybe, or
I think it's a
you know what I mean?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think one, he's giving them the command that he was supposed to do. This is Peter was supposed to always, and so were the other disciples, feed and tend the lambs and the sheep. But they've lost their focus because of where they're at, what they're feeling. And if you look at it, I believe Jesus asked Peter 3 times, because if you see the third time, Peter gets annoyed by it, or hurt by it, whatever way you want to say it.
Yeah.
It's because that's the same thing he's asking God. He's asking God, if you love me, then why did you let this happen? You see, sometimes God's going to ask us the questions right back to us to make us understand. Because what's Peter's response? Lord, you know I love you.
You know I love you,
well, that's the same response that God tells us. You know I love you. Why do you keep asking? Why do you keep worrying about it? And you see, that's what Jesus is trying to make Peter understand, is that he doesn't need to keep asking for forgiveness 100 times. He's already been forgiven.
Right.
He doesn't need to keep beating himself up because he's already been forgiven. Now he needs to focus on what he has him doing. And I think that's one of the things that there in the feeding and the tending and stuff, that's going to happen at different times. I mean, Pastor just gave some examples that happen at the church, but it goes beyond that. Like, if we just focus on the church, we lose sight of everything.
Right.
Like, there's the tending and the feeding that happen in the personal life with your families and stuff. There's the tending and the feeding that happen with people that God brings into your life, the small home Bible studies, the different, there's so many different things, and I think sometimes that's what we get lost in, is we just look at the church as the feeding and the tending. But this was a command to everyone. This was a command to anyone that loves God, because the way, again, and we can't just get stuck with one analogy. Like, if we just, the reason he calls them lambs and sheep, because we're lambs and sheep. Those are brothers and sisters. Those are people we should be helping, we should be caring about, whether they're at our church or we know them from work or they're personal friends or their family, whatever. And I think that's one of the things that we always have to keep in mind, is like the feeding and tending are not just for church times or pastors or people ordained or whatever. It's for everyone. Like, we're all should be feeding and tending and helping each other grow and seeking him. And I think he's guiding Peter to that.
It ain't, because a lot of people, when they see this, they think it's about ministry. Oh, they're going to tell me to get involved, or they're going to tell me to do that. If God tells you, great, to help out the church, which we all should. But if God doesn't tell you, hey, you feed your family, you feed your friends, you start at home, with your children, with your family and all that, you know, and that, like you said, at your job too, you know, once they know you're a Christian, people tend to come to you for advice or for an answer and all that, you know. And when you start ministering to them, you're feeding them, you know. You're feeding them, and you know, that's what most of the time God wants us to do, you know, just feed the people.
Yeah, you know what I kind of got from this too was like, you know, Jesus was telling Peter, hey, look, you stay focused, you know, on me, you know, and do what I tell you to do. And if you look at 22, it said, Jesus said to him, if I want him to remain, he was talking about, I guess, John, yeah, until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. And, you know, I think it's our job, you know, our jobs as people who do follow Christ, you know, yeah, we should tend to the sheep and we should feed them and we should do all of that. But like Pastor said, you can't force feed people. You know, sometimes people that's just people. You can't force feed them. And then another thing, like, there's a scripture that says, I used to drink milk, now you eat, something like that, right? Now
Paul
you eat meat, right? You know, so it's look, everybody has a different, you know, different purpose, a different walk with Christ. Yeah. You know, our job is to lead people to him, sow the seed, and then you let God water that seed or do whatever God is going to do, you know. So, and we should just always just be focused on him, just like because, you said.
You know, like you said, Peter started looking. Jesus told him how he was gonna die. You know, what was his life gonna be?
Yeah, that's right.
So you know, and he looked at John, the one that would
always be on his chest. Yeah,
and he asked, "Well, what about him?" And then I think in Peter's mind, I know you love him more than me, so is he gonna die like me?
Yeah.
You know, is he gonna live? And that's what Jesus told him. You know, what is it to you?
Right.
You know,
I love that response.
It's like us, you know. We all make our choices to do what we do for God. In our ministry, we never force anybody to get involved or not. Yes, we ask them. Yes, we ask for volunteers and all that. But they have to, want to. But once you make that decision, you know, whatever God has for you, you know, that's what God has for you. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't worry about anybody else. Mm-hmm. If he's responding to the same calling as you, or he's doing what you're doing, you know, he's calling you. You know, I tell a lot of people that I know, you know, some from church, others from out of the church, and they start asking me about different ministries and all that. I tell them, look, I ain't got time to worry about them. You know, God didn't call me to run their ministry.
Right.
God called me to run our ministry. We have to give an account as leaders, us three, and the rest that are here, give an account in how God telling us to lead our church, to lead our ministry, you know, and that's what God wants us to do, you know. If my road is harder than your road, or your road is harder than my road, that's between you and God, nobody else, you know. You know, like me, I chose to be a pastor, you know. I chose to go full-time a long time ago, you know. I can't be worrying, oh, God, you know, I should have worked more, I should have done this. No, I did what God called me to do. And you know what? God has blessed me. Now, did I want more? Like any human being, yes. But God gave me what I need. You know, sometimes he'll give me what I want. But most of the time it's what you need. Right. You know. And Peter started, you know, right there, his human side came, okay, I'm going to die a horrible death, you know, so what about the rest? And that's Christianity. Once you come to the Lord, you are responsible for your own relationship with Christ, you know. As a pastor, and the senior pastor, and then Tony's the pastor, you're an associate pastor. We have the people that come, we are responsible for them. But we cannot live their salvation, and we cannot live their relationship. We can try to guide them and help them, through everything we have. But we all are responsible for our own relationship with Christ. I'm responsible to take care of mine. I'm responsible to whatever God tells me to do or not do.
Yeah.
And we, because one day we're gonna give an account to how we run our ministry, how we run our church, not only our relationship with Him, but our church. And that's what Jesus was trying to tell Peter.
Yeah. What do you think?
Got anything else?
I agree. I mean, it's probably splitting hairs more than anything. I agree to a certain extent. I mean, I definitely agree. We're all responsible for certain things and things like that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the things are correlated. If you have a relationship with God, then you're running the ministry the way you're supposed to be.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to stand in front of God and He's going to be like, okay, we're going to go through every Sunday and this is like, I'm responsible for, like, again, I'm responsible for the food I put out. To your point, I can't force anyone to eat it. So I think those are the kind of like splitting hair pieces that I talk about. But to me, I think when you look at it, you have to. I know we've talked a lot about ministry, but when we look at it from a full aspect of the life, I think when you look at Peter and when God's telling him, when Jesus is telling him, when you were young, you went. This is forecasting not just his death, but also his life. Like, as you start studying Acts and the letters, Peter went a lot of places, not because he wanted to, but because either God sent him or circumstances that God created. Like, Peter is in hiding most of the rest of his life because he sought out to be killed. And, when Paul gets converted, like, they have to go through so many different things to get Paul in front of Peter and James and everyone else because of this. So it's not the life that Peter was thinking. And again, when Peter, when I read this, I'm echoing more things. Like, at the end of the day, Peter dies by crucifixion. He has to be put upside down.
Right.
And that's one of the things that Jesus is talking about here. But you also got to remember in Acts, you read about where Peter's called to go teach to the Gentiles, and he tells God no. He tells them they're dirty. Again, his hands being guided to somewhere where he wouldn't want to go, but he's being told to go. And you see this in Peter's life is that, and that's a lot of times the same thing with us, is God's going to guide our life in different ways like you were talking about, and he's going to direct us, but we're always looking at the others. Like we look at John and like he's looking at John and saying, I think John wrote this for two reasons at the very end. One, to explain that we're all going to have different paths, and it's not our job to look at each other and say, okay, that's my path.
Right.
Why are they not the same?
Right. I agree with that. I agree with that.
The second piece, because of this, there was a rumor that John was never going to die, and John's near his death when he's writing this, so he's like, no, I'm going to die.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to live forever. Like, that's just a rumor. Like, people didn't understand they mistook what Jesus said here. He said, if I wanted, not that he already had commanded it. And John, like, I don't know, when you look at the brutality of it, Peter suffered the most horrendous death probably from them. Yeah. From the two. But John suffered a more lonely death because he is, from the church history, he is the only disciple to actually die of pretty much old age. But he went through this whole ordeal of seeing all of them die, being exiled for a while. Yeah. So it wasn't easy while he was exiled. Then, I think when Constantine takes over, I can't remember what, he's brought back from exile, but he's already an old man at this point. He's near his death. Like he's that's it for him. But he has to live. But he had to live to see all his friends and people he cared about die off. Don't know which is, from a brutality, Peter definitely, but don't know who suffered more, because John had to live through all of that and see all the disciples, all the people he spent time with, die out. And so you kind of see that there's the two circumstances here. And I think that's one of the things that John's pointing out here is we all have different walks in our life, different things, like you were saying. And I think that's something that we get caught up with, is looking at it and trying to compare our life to somebody else, or and it's not just church, it's just life in general. Sometimes we're comparing our lives to others. Just because we're saved doesn't mean we're all going to have the same thing, the same blessings, the same lifestyle, the same whatever.
Yeah, I've done it. I've done it before.
I remember when David Wilkerson died. To me, he was one of the modern prophets. Thus says the Lord, and to me, I always thought highly of him as a man of God. And all this, and he died a horrific death. He died on a head-on wreck, and his wife got hurt and all that. And the Lord took him that way, and at first I said, "Wow, Lord, this man was right with you, to a certain extent." But going back, every death is going to be different for every Christian or every human being. Some are going to be taken in their sleep, others going to be taken by sickness, others are going to be taken by wrecks or whatever it is. But we're all going to come to that point. And you're right. John had to live. I remember my grandmother once said, when we buried my cousin, and now she told me, look, I'm tired of burying, my grandsons and all that, my children, and I'm still alive. To her, it was the worst pain in her life, and she rather wanted to go, but, we never know.
We don't know when God has our timing or what. I think the last piece to close this out is 25, and he wrote, or 24 and 25, this is the disciple who testified of these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the book that would be written. Amen. And I think John's just finalizing this again, because you got to remember, who is this being written for? This is written for future people who weren't there for the first hand.
Next generation, right.
And so he's writing it. This is a solemn oath saying this is written by someone who was actually there. So he's certifying it as, I was there, and this is a first-hand testimony. Secondly, I think, is the thought that there were so many other miracles. Like sometimes people will count the different miracles. Oh, Jesus did this many miracles, or these or this. But we come to understand that Jesus was doing a lot of stuff that wasn't written down.
Right, it's not written.
Like there was so much going on, and then there was times where he was away from his disciples, so they would only know if Jesus told them. Like he wasn't. There was times where that's why I like the show The Chosen, because it gives the breakout, and you see where Jesus goes away and visits the family, and the disciples are staying in their area visiting their family because they have family. They have family. It wasn't like they were just 12 lonely men that he picked up. Peter had a wife.
Yeah.
They had families, and so you see he gives them time to go back to their families. He goes to visit his family, and I think that's one of the things that we miss is that Christ is he was doing constant miracles, doing things on there. We only see certain ones because they're written for our benefit, but I think the whole point of it was they could have written way more of the miracles he did, but then again, we would be so focused on the miracles, and not the one that made it. And I think that's the beauty of John. John's about the relationship with Christ, and honestly, John writes a little bit of his relationship with Christ. You see it in there, but to me, a lot of it he's showing Peter's relationship with Christ. He's showing how Peter's being transformed because. Which is always interesting because Peter definitely was a leader in the church. He asked the Catholics the first pope, which I always find interesting. But yet it was James, the brother of Christ, who actually was the authority in Jerusalem. So it's always a weird, interesting thing there because when they bring Paul to settle the matter of circumcision and stuff like that, it's James who has the final say.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And so you see the dynamics when you go into Acts and other letters of it. But to see Peter, a big cornerstone in this, who's going to be part of the early church, you get to see his life story being told by his friend, being told by someone who was there, who saw it. Because I think if Peter will talk in his letters, but if Peter told his own full story, people would say, well, who knows? He's biased. He's just making himself look good. But here, John's taking it from the outside look, and he's telling the story, and it's add-ons to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but this is a first-hand experience of someone there. Because Peter's story, I think you will find bits of it in Luke, because Luke wrote and he traveled with Peter and Paul, in all of them, or the Mark. Sorry, is it Mark or Luke? One of them traveled with them, and so you get kind of the Peter's firsthand stories there. So, anything on the Book of John before we close it out?
No.
No,
Interesting
it
book.
was just really, really
Hopefully,
interesting.
they receive something and
Yeah.
they study it more because we just really touched on the
surface.
surface of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's
definitely.
a lot more that God can reveal to them.
Totally agree.
So
I mean, we could restart the Book of John,
Right.
and we probably pull out points.
Oh
that we
yeah.
pulled
Oh
out the first
definitely.
time.
Oh yeah. It's no
there's
none.
so
It's
much
no
in
doubt about it.
but I know we're gonna do several without not going into the Book of Acts yet, but just some sessions. So, do they have anything they want to say or the questions they want to
Leave it in the comments.
Let us know so we can.
Please.
Yeah, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them in. We're gonna, like he said, we're gonna do a couple other topics here, and then going into November, we'll be starting the Book of Acts. So hopefully, you guys will wrap up John, and then we'll jump into the Book of Acts. With that said,
No Names
That's it.
Podcast.